Of all the Murder Drones episodes that have come out so far, Dead End, I can say without a doubt, is one of the most important episodes of the series, but it is so different from any episode to come before it, I wouldn't be surprised if it divides a chunk of the Murder Drones fanbase. I'm going to go over a pretty lengthy summary of what happens in this episode, so if you want to get straight to the reason why people watch my videos, skip to the time displayed on the screen. The episode opens inside an office where we see a worker drone hiding in a cubicle and attempting to drag a paralyzed worker drone to safety, but doesn't get far as some robotic velociraptors tear the paralyzed worker drone apart, paralyze the other worker drone with a light that is embedded in the Roboraptor's head, and make a meal out of said worker drone. The episode then cuts to right where we left off, with the entire cast of the show finally coming face to face with each other. Tessa is delighted to see N, Uzi is aggressive towards Tessa because she's a human, Uzi is annoyed at seeing Jay again, and Jay explains that the more effective worker drones were cloned more. Tessa explains that Sin disappeared from Earth and her last known act was sending the murder drones to Copper 9. Before the formalities continue, Doll steals the Robobug from Tessa and Jay follows in pursuit, but Doll is able to jump into a hole in the middle of a nearby building, resulting in a successful escape. The rest of the group catches up and Tessa tells Jay to explain exactly what Sin's orders were, which are as follows. Step 1, clear drop zone of life and construct spire. Step 2, enter any lab that has a symbol similar to the one on Nori's necklace. Tessa tells Jay to go guard her ship and says that her goal is to destroy any of the labs that Sin wants. Uzi asks why Doll is involved, and Tessa explains that the humans gave Doll's parents the Absolute Solver and wants to find out why. The group descends down the hole after Doll to be greeted by many drone corpses that are the byproduct of security measures made to protect the facility from worker drones and murder drones alike. The group finds a secret elevator and Tessa falls into a trap that drags her away, with surprisingly little concern from the rest of the group. N and Uzi come across a corridor with a baby drone lying on the floor giggling, and Uzi and N waste no time to shoot at it as it grows mechanical spider legs and crawls away. Another worker drone named Alice appears behind them, accompanied by the spider baby named Bo, and uses an EMP to incapacitate the group. Uzi wakes up to see Alice hacking apart a worker drone corpse and salvaging its parts, and is about to move on to V, but Uzi warns her that if she does so, it will awaken the Absolute Solver. Alice shrugs off Uzi's warnings, saying that heat slows him down, and shows her an oven full of hearts just like the one we saw crawl out of Eldritch J. Uzi tries to use her powers to break free, but can't do so because of a magnet attached to her head, and Alice notices the necklace Uzi is wearing, and says that she hasn't seen O2 since leaving them for dead. In another room, Tessa and N are strapped to tables, and Bo is dissecting N, but is interrupted when Alice calls for him to bring more magnets to suppress Uzi. Tessa escapes from her bindings and brings N along with her to discuss in more detail why she is there. This doesn't get past Alice, who sees them on the security cameras and unleashes the robo-velociraptors known as the Sentinels. Tessa brings N to a cubicle and brings up a picture of Earth to show N. At first he's not interested and is only concerned about saving Uzi, but then sees Earth ripped apart by a black hole surrounded with yellow tendrils. After the incident at the mansion, the Absolute Solver spread across Earth and other surrounding planets and destroyed them. The humans on Copper 9 saw what had happened and tried to study the Absolute Solver by testing it on worker drones, but only ended up spreading it. Tessa came to Copper 9 to find any of the worker drones infected by the Absolute Solver and kill them to stop the spread, and pleads to N to help her when the time comes to put Uzi down, since sooner or later, she's going to become completely possessed by the Absolute Solver, just like Nori did. Their conversation is interrupted by a Sentinel paralyzing N and dragging him away. Tessa stops the Sentinel from killing N, but ends up getting bit by it since it doesn't recognize Tessa as a human due to her suit, but upon seeing her bleed, it malfunctions and shuts down. Uzi sees all this happen and tries as hard as she can to use her powers to escape, causing her to overdo it and for a brief moment becomes completely possessed by the Absolute Solver and blows up the control panel to the doors, unlocking them and drawing the Sentinel's attention. A Sentinel gets inside and quickly paralyzes and kills Alice and is about to kill Uzi, but Bo distracts it with a laser it fires at V's restraints to release her and becomes the Sentinel's next victim. V escapes with Uzi and regroups with Tessa and N. V insists that they leave and tells N to come along, but N hesitates, still thinking about the proposition Tessa made to him. Uzi wakes up and hugs N, knowing he's safe, and V notices how uneasy N is and how serious Tessa is, and begins to realize that something is wrong. The group continues to roam around the facility and finds a paralyzed doll holding the Robobug. Everyone knows it's a trap other than Tessa, who casually picks up the bug whilst being especially proud of herself. The trio walks down the hall cautiously and Uzi and N finally hold hands, much to the disgust of V and annoyance of Tessa. As the group begins to bicker, Doll wakes up and puts the Robobug on the key reader, summoning a secret elevator to go down further into the labs. Doll jumps down the elevator shaft, but not before opening up multiple doors, releasing more Sentinels. The Sentinel that malfunctioned earlier returns and is still malfunctional, so it now craves Tessa's blood, and Uzi uses the Absolute Solver to rip a hole into the elevator so they can get inside, which escalates her condition, further making her more and more influenced by the Absolute Solver. The group gets into the elevator with the exception of V, who stays behind to fight off the Sentinels, but a Sentinel destroys the key reader, making the elevator begin to raise again, so V makes the decision to shoot the wires to make the elevator drop, which leaves her behind to be killed by the Sentinels, ending the episode. So in case you couldn't tell by the summary, this episode is extraordinarily dense, to the point where if you combine the last 2 or 3 episodes together, this episode would still have more important moments and be more impactful on the overall story of the show. Remember how I praised episode 3 for never wasting a moment and always having something interesting happening to captivate attention at all times? This episode does that, but unlike episode 3, it uses all the mysteries and character development that has happened in the show to its advantage. But unlike episode 4, the characters in this episode are pretty unremarkable, with the exception of one character who carries the comedy and a lot of this episode on her back. Tessa riding off of her true introduction in episode 5 is easily becoming one of the best characters in the show. Her carefree manic behavior completely outshines every other character in the episode almost to a fault. She's so charming and fun to watch, it becomes difficult to enjoy the other characters because I just want to see more of her. In modern media, it's become harder and harder to design a character like this without them resorting to crass language or being so over-energetic to the point where they become annoying. But Tessa is different. There are moments where she calms down and can be completely serious in a very natural way so as not to feel like those moments are inconsistent with her personality. But when she is having fun, she doesn't interrupt other characters' moments with annoying quips or unnecessary jokes like she's trying to be the center of attention. In fact, she's so self-confident she's almost oblivious to others around her and in a weird way almost seems narcissistic at times, but with all the charm and none of the cruelty. The only problem I have with this character is that she is so hard to understand due to her thick Australian accent and fast way of speaking at times, and then Glitch gave her a helmet that muffled her voice on top of that. You could gamble with your friends over who in the group would understand her the most, and it would be tenser than any poker game you will ever play in your life. But besides that, Liam and Glitch really struck gold with this character, and although I'm not the biggest fan of spin-off shows, if there were ever a character to deserve one, it's her. And if there is anyone in this episode who's the most outshined by Tessa, it's N. N's usual optimism and dorky nature are kind of hidden away in this episode. There's never really a moment where he's as likable as he was in the previous episode, with the exception of him trying to help Bo dissect him, which was pretty wholesome. As for his interactions with Tessa, one would think that these two would be best buddies with how optimistic and at times childish they both are, but for some reason N doesn't really seem to like Tessa. He looked uncomfortable being around her in the last episode, and in this episode he doesn't really ever try to talk to her or be around her, he just seems to distance himself from her despite her loving his company. But besides that, he doesn't really have any notable interactions with anyone besides the obvious. This episode does, however, do something for N which I have been waiting the entire series for, which is a struggle for him to overcome. The inevitable choice he will have to make on whether he has to kill Uzi or let the universe die is exactly what this character needed so he can have something to do other than being Uzi's guardian angel and love interest. An internal struggle that he alone has to solve without Uzi's guidance so we can see if he's willing to do the right thing even if it hurts himself and someone else, is a situation that always adds more depth to people-pleasing characters like these and will truly determine how much of a yes man he is. But the results of that story beat will be witnessed in a future episode. As for this episode, his biggest contribution is being something for Uzi to thirst over, which believe me, she does. Uzi has gone full love-struck mode in this episode and has moments with N that Newsy shippers could only dream of. They are basically an unofficial middle school tier couple now, with a couple of hand-holding moments and hugs which I could have done with less of, but they don't ever disrupt the pacing of the episode or feel out of place, so they don't really bother me that much. Thankfully, these romance moments aren't all Uzi brings to the table in this episode. She still has her gremlin moments and can summon her wings and tail from episode 4, which seems like an unnecessary addition on top of her solver powers, but could come into play if she's ever stuck in a big fight scene. But what defined her the most in this episode are the moments where she is actively being possessed by the Absolute Solver. This added threat of her slowly losing control of herself adds urgency to the show and helps steer the show more towards a goal, which is to find Uzi a cure. It's just too bad it took until the 6th episode for this to happen, since it would have added some much needed structure to the show if this had happened for her in a moment back in like episode 3, but I'll leave that for the season review. We are introduced to 2 new characters in this episode, Alice and Bo. Bo is barely a character, I can't really say much about him, but Alice feels like a result of Liam wanting to explain what Nori was like, and couldn't think of a better way than add an unimportant character who serves her purpose and is expendable, which is exactly what Alice is. She monologues about Nori to Uzi and then gets killed off. We already had the Sentinels be effective at being the threat. We didn't need the out-of-place crazy cannibal-like character on top of that. Audio diaries or security camera footage would have worked just fine. The most confusing character in this episode is Doll. We are revealed her motive, which is fine, but why did she steal the Robobug? Did she think Tessa wasn't going to hold up her end of the deal? Right before Tessa noticed Uzi N and V, Tessa told Doll to come along, so why would she steal it for herself? Does she not trust Tessa with finding out more about the episode solver even though she knows more about it than anyone else? If she wanted to find out more about what was done to her parents, having Tessa by her side would probably make things a lot easier to understand. Then there's a point where Doll lures them into a trap, which is something she didn't need to do. She could have just left on the elevator before they arrived, but for some reason she waited so she could try to get them killed by the Sentinels. Which again, why? We will probably get some answers from Doll in the next episode, but right now her character seems a bit inconsistent, unless of course she did all that so there was a chance that V might die, which, well, let's talk about V. V in this episode feels like the V from episodes 2 and 3, as in she's barely there. I was looking forward to seeing Tessa and V interact since Tessa might have been able to bring out another side of V since she's like a mother to her, but she ends up treating her just like everyone else, unnecessarily aggressive and serious. The only reason she's at all important in this episode is because of the ending, which I have no problem saying that I hate. Yeah, self-sacrifice is a noble and usually very emotional trope, but it feels cheap if it's not convincing. And surely no one actually believes she's dead, right? Ever since episode 3, V has acted like she's known something the rest of the group didn't, and that has been one of her primary character traits since then, but we never got to actually learn what that was. All of those cryptic comments and fear she's expressed has to pay off in some way, and so far, it never has. Then there's Lizzie. I have a hard time believing that Liam would build up these characters' friendship if there wasn't some sort of payoff. You have to keep in mind that when writing these episodes, every decision Liam makes is for a reason, and there is a reason he gave V a friend that we still have yet to see, and if V really is dead, it would be pretty hard for there to be any conclusion or payoff to their friendship. To put it simply, there are too many loose ends that V left behind, and it's not impossible for them to be tied up without her, but it would be a very unsatisfying choice to do so. And that's all without taking into account that in the same episode, Jay mentions that effective murder drones were cloned more, and I would be very surprised if V didn't meet that criteria, but even if she didn't, there is still this line.
Whoa, hey, cut that thing up and you're gonna get a big creepy worm. An improvement.
Surely the entire fanbase wouldn't forget the entirety of episode 2, even when it literally was brought up again in the same episode that V dies. It's almost like the events of episode 2 were brought up again for a reason or something. Anyways, I hate fake out deaths if they are obviously a fake out, and if she really is dead, she feels like an unfinished character. Alright, well, that's everyone. Wait, Jay was in this episode. She left before the 3-minute mark. V fans may be crying, but us Jay fans are the true victims of this episode. I would have just skipped over Jay, but like I've mentioned multiple times, Liam wouldn't make the decisions he has made without a reason. There is a reason Jay was brought back, and I'm beginning to suspect that there's going to be a big plot twist involving her. You don't bring a character back from the dead and then give them minimal screen time unless you're trying to make them less suspicious of something. Maybe it'll turn out she has been working for Sin the whole time or something, but I don't think we are going to see the importance of this character until the final episode, since the next episode will take place very deep underground, where Jay is not. She also has the line where she mentions effective murder drones are cloned more, which, I mean, she was beaten by an emo teenager wielding a pen. How is Jay the effective one? I want to say she was lying, but if she is telling the truth, it's only setting up for more fake out deaths, and makes the value of N and V's lives much less valuable since they have a chance at coming back to life. And I don't really blame the audience for not noticing minor flaws like these because this episode is dizzyingly fast. And I mean that very literally. The opening of the episode sets a more dark and violent tone than usual. The reveal that it was Sin that sent N, V, and J to Copper 9 recontextualizes the entire role they play in the grand scheme of the show. The mention that the Absolute Solver transformation can be slowed down by heat, the reveal of Earth being destroyed, the explanation of how Nori got the Absolute Solver, N's realization that he might have to kill Uzi, the shock of Tessa's hand getting bitten, Uzi getting possessed by the Absolute Solver, and V's sacrifice. All of these moments, some of which are some of the most important in this series, are thrown at you full speed one after another, all while being set in a tense, claustrophobic setting where you can tell the main cast is in real danger for the first time. This is both the episode's biggest strength and weakness, because while it does a commendable job of really making the viewer hold their breath at times, you'll be doing it so much in such a short period of time, you might start to get lightheaded. But the very danger that makes this episode stand out from the rest of the show feels artificial at times. For example, remember when V was strapped to the table? Blade wings in general are a very situational tool to have and would barely come in handy, but guess what? This is the exact situation where they are actually helpful. The point of having blade wings is so that you can cut things while your hands are preoccupied. Like, oh, I don't know, being strapped to a table by your wrists. And then there are the Sentinels. One could make the argument that the murder drones were only designed to kill worker drones, and that's why they have so much trouble with the Sentinels, but I have a hard time believing that they would have so much trouble fighting them. The murder drones have blades, rockets, lasers, blade wings, blade fingers, the strength to pry open a massive hydraulic door, and a stinger on their tail, and they use almost none of them when fighting the Sentinels. Would it be so hard to just close your eyes and shoot, down a corridor? And I'm getting really tired of N never pulling his weight in moments like these. It's almost hard to remember that he's experienced in mass murder and has all of the same capabilities that V has. His total tunnel vision for protecting Uzi is something that I was hoping V was going to address at some point in this episode, but now that may never happen. I'm sure he will have his big moment later on, but as it stands, he's more of a liability to the group than anything else. But besides those moments, Alice's existence, and V's sacrifice, there were a lot of good moments to be had. We get plenty of lore dumps and explanations about Nori and the Absolute Solver, which is precisely what this show is in need of by this point. The story feels like it's progressing, which is a problem people have had with the show, where it feels like the show is just running in place and not going anywhere. And relationships between the cast are finally being strained beyond V just being angry all the time. There are also a bunch of smaller moments, such as the scene where Jay chases Doll and shows one of the most significant advantages of using 3-dimensional animation to show environmental depth and how the characters interact with it, a bunch of random cute moments in the background, the gratitude that I feel towards Liam for not starting the episode with a time skip, and the repeated ominous shot of characters staring into Tessa's helmet that is cinematic and eerie enough to change the tone of a scene entirely. This episode was a great return to form for Murder Drones, and it really stands out as being different from any episode we have seen yet, which, like I said in the intro, will probably divide fans. This episode is so much more violent and dark than anything we have ever seen, and has a really oppressive atmosphere with barely any comedic moments to lighten the mood. And when fans say that the show is fast-paced, this is going to be the poster child example of that. Pairing all of those traits together, and the result is no comfort to be found in this episode. It's a roller coaster of bad situation after bad situation that the more faint-hearted viewers might not want to rewatch unless they want to be put on edge. And then there's the newsy romance, which is in full swing in this episode and is bound to leave a bitter taste in a lot of shippers' mouths. Dead End is a brutal showcase of just how horrific the show can be when it wants to be, all while stuffing your brain full of plot details at a near dangerous speed that at times can make the episode feel like it's lacking direction. That being said, this episode often, but not always, hits the mark it's aiming for, while simultaneously acting as the antithesis to some of my biggest complaints about the last few episodes, but every time I watch it, I'm always left feeling a little more uneasy than I would like to be, alongside contracting a guaranteed headache.